Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your hosts Sam Foote.
And Anne Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Microsoft 365 focused IT security professionals.
It's episode 16 of season 4. Sam and I had a recent discussion around Windows management using Microsoft Intune, an approach to managing endpoints anywhere. Here are a few things we covered. Traditional management of Windows endpoints. What is Microsoft Intune? How can modern management help an organization? And how is it licensed?
We have noticed a number of you aren't subscribed. If you do enjoy our podcasts, please do consider subscribing. It would mean a lot for us for you to show your support to the show.
It's a really great episode, so let's dive in.
Hey Alan, how are you?
Hey Sam, not doing too bad. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Any big updates in the world of Microsoft this week?
Some of the new Surface devices were released last week, or announced at least. I think it was on Thursday.
Okay. I haven't seen those at all, actually. Anything that caught your eye or anything exciting going on with them?
I haven't dived into it too much yet. I was just checking if they had a new Surface Laptop Studio 2, which they did. That's probably the only thing I did check out. So I didn't check any of the other devices, but that's the one I was looking at because I've wanted a one of the at least the original ones. But yeah, I thought I'd wait for the second one, so maybe I might in the future get one if I can afford it.
Yeah. To be fair, I have a Surface. What do I have? Just a Surface laptop for work, Alan. Is it a Surface Laptop 4 or something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
It's actually really good, to be fair. It's like the build quality is really good, and in touch wood, it's actually been sort of rock solid, really, from a hardware perspective. And my laptop's got I think it's like an Alcantara like top to it, and I thought it was going to get really grubby, but it actually hasn't, and it's really nice, to sort of, because
Not
I've come from a world of MacBooks where like it's all aluminium, right? And I think it's quite nice having that fabric there because it's sort of softer, to rest your hands on. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I've not really used a Surface for work. Used to imagine quite a few years ago, very few years ago when they were first coming out. But yeah, the only time I got a chance to see them was when I was at Ignite last year and got to actually get some hands-on action
Yeah.
with them. So
Yeah, I could do with another Type C port and real Thunderbolt. That's what I'd like. That's the only thing I miss, but I think the new one the USB-C port might be Thunderbolt now anyway, if I remember rightly. That's the only thing I really kind of miss.
yeah, the Surface Laptop Studio 2 has. I don't know about if the first one did or not. But yeah, I've not checked the others.
Yeah, that's the only bit I miss. But as an all-round sort of suite of products, I've never heard any bad words spoken of it. To be totally honest with you.
No, and I think the new ones as well are serviceable, as in you can some of them you can open up and repair yourself kind of thing. Some bits, I think some of the previous ones that was a criticism that it's got to go back to Microsoft to be fixed, kind of thing for somewhat simple things.
Yeah, and considering when you're buying like a high-end workstation sort of grade laptop as well, you kind of run those into the ground, really, don't you? Right? Because there's such large expenses. You want to maximize, the usable life out of it. And after 4 years, once your battery's nuked, it's really nice that you can open it up, throw a new battery in it, and get at least a little bit more life. Sort of sweat that asset a little bit more, right? And that's one of the things that I've always struggled with especially with MacBooks. You effectively, it depends what your risk tolerance is, but you effectively have to go for Apple Care because if you have anything wrong with it, it's more than the cost of sort of the highest level Apple Care, right? So it's kind of like it's a necessity at that point.
Yeah, definitely.
Right, let's get off of laptops, especially non-Microsoft laptops, and get on to Intune. So Alan's going to take point on Intune. It's something that he works with. I'll say extensively. That's the word I'll use, Alan. So should we start sort of a bit in the past? What's sort of the traditional management strategies of Windows devices been in the enterprise?
Yeah, so that quite a lot of this is still potentially, in play today, depending on the type, the organization and things like that. But generally, managing Windows devices, would always be connected to Active Directory, from a authentication perspective. But then you would use group policy GPOs to then deploy that configuration. So you download, um, the policies, or they get upgraded as operating systems come out, and you can then put them into Active Directory, and then you use Group Policy Manager to then create your policies for your Windows devices, and this includes servers, things like that. Or potentially you might be doing some installations manually. So that's kind of what you're doing, and kind of constraints around this is that if you want to update any of this policy, the device has to be able to connect to the Active Directory to get those updates, and that's normally on the local network or over a VPN if it's configured to allow that. And you could as well deploy software via group policy. It's not as nice, and you can run scripts to go and get the files, things like that again. But like I said, you've got to potentially have the skills, the capability to be able to create those scripts, and it's got to be on the network for the time of it downloading the file and executing. And you're relying on that script to run successfully, kind of thing. And if it errors, then you don't get any central reporting on that. You only know on the device itself if something's been installed. And that's all great. And kind of actually thinking about it, one bit that you don't get is that central reporting about whether something has actually deployed across your estate. How do you know that your group policy is applied correctly on all devices? Without going to all the devices and checking them, or assuming, doing a sample, you're not going to know. Now, there are other tools out there to help with managing endpoints. Don't get me wrong, but from a Microsoft sort of baseline, doing configuration, locking down the devices, generally it's come from group policy. Installation of software might be done manually. Rebuilds might be done manually. It might be that you turn it on, you get into Windows, you then connect it to Active Directory, or you might use Microsoft Deployment Tools, MDT, to do it on the network. And build yourself a task sequence to be able to do the build in effect. Probably moving on slightly from that, there is what used to be called System Center Configuration Manager. I think it's now called Intune Configuration Manager, or I have to check that actually, but it's either that or it used to be called Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager after the rebrand of Intune. But Intune's gone back now, hasn't it, to Intune? So you could use that, and again, that is a really great tool. But again, that's being on the network. So when we hit the pandemic time, a couple of years or 3 or 4 years ago now, if you didn't have it so that you could remotely access it, you didn't have VPNs, then devices couldn't be managed. New policies couldn't be pushed out. And I seen that as from where I was working previously, where we were trying to help customers get that connection, get them managed, get them up to date, kind of thing. So that's kind of how it was traditionally and is today in some organizations, because they can't move to maybe modern management or they don't know about it. And there's nothing wrong with that as well. It's not saying it's bad. It's just that there are benefits to moving to Microsoft Intune and do model management.
Yeah, so I think what you're basically saying is newer working practices have really required us to think outside the literal box of our offices, right?
Yeah.
And gone of the days of if something didn't install correctly, you could walk down to somebody's office or cubicle or working area, and go and debug a local script that hasn't run. You now could have tens, hundreds, or thousands of miles between you and your users, I suppose, right? So, in those I'll call them disconnected environments, there has to be a more, should I call it, integrated solution? Is probably a better way, or I don't know, flexible solution in terms of inside outside the org, and that's really where Intune comes in.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, it is definitely a change in how we work today, in being more flexible about where users connect from. Because like you said, that everything was always on site. Everyone worked in the office, so it was only less than 24 hours that something wouldn't connect in, or maybe it's like the occasional time someone goes out on a business trip or something, and it's only going to be that 1 or 2 days. It's not too bad. Now we're in a world where hybrid working's in place, and like you said, someone could be 3 months, at home.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. We definitely need that level of sort of flexibility, for sure. So okay, with that said, what is Intune, and how does it help you manage Windows?
So Microsoft Intune is a mobile device management tool. And whilst it says mobile device management, it does do Windows as well. So it's kind of born. It probably started off as a MDM, but now is still technically the management is still that sort of capability, but now it's bigger than that. So Intune's had various like lives. It used to be, the very first version was a Silverlight version, which was like 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago.
Silverlight. Wow,
Yeah.
that brings back some. I'll call them memories for me, for sure.
Yes. So that version was definitely a first attempt at mobile device management, and it wasn't, to be fair, wasn't up to scratch. There were other MDMs out there that were a lot better. But in effect, Microsoft rebuilt Intune into what it is today, into the was Azure portal. Now it's got its own portal, intune.microsoft.com. And now I've seen it sort of grow throughout the years on its capability, and it's insane. So quickly, it's in effect, it can manage Windows, it can manage iOS and Android devices, mobile devices. It can do Mac OS, and it can also, I think it's in public preview now, that it can do Chrome OS as well, which I haven't had a chance to play with. And I think it's starting to do some of the Linux desktops as well now. So it's definitely getting a spread of all of the operating systems. It doesn't do Windows Server, because it's mainly designed for user endpoints. There is some capability around Defender for Endpoint where it kind of ties in a little bit with servers, but that's probably another episode around how you manage those. But yes, so it allows you to do full management. You can also do bring your own side of things, so personal devices, and as well as zero touch deployments for most of the operating systems that we've just talked about. It's in Azure, and devices that connect to it connect over the internet to it. So it doesn't matter where they are, they can check in and do their, get their policies or get their applications. Kind of just said it, but it does do application deployment. So you can upload your software and then get it to be downloaded to the devices, or go in the company portal if you need it, then install it scenario, rather than it being required for that device. So yeah, that's probably a quick rundown of what Intune is. It manages config, policies, things like that, in the cloud.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for that overview, Alan. It's it's hard on a podcast to sort of go into depth about every last feature that's there, I suppose. But I suppose my question there is is there anything that you give up using Intune over those more traditional management solutions?
As in remove, or do you mean like you miss you're missing feature missing sort of kind of thing?
Yeah, have you got full feature parity to if I was a steadfast sysadmin and I was like, no, I'm not moving to Intune because of X. What is that X, if there even is one?
So there probably was some things that it couldn't do beforehand, but I think in today's version of it, or it's today's release at least, it's the only bits that are potentially missing is around prioritization of policies. So if you've got multiple policies, setting the same config, there's no, at the moment, as far as I'm aware, there's no way to prioritize them. So you kind of have to design your policies in a way to exclude users if they need this one kind of thing. So it's a little bit more thinking around that. But outside of that, a lot of it has now come in. There's a lot of group policy configuration you can do now within Intune, and that's probably the bit that was potentially missing. Be able to do certain things via Intune, but that wasn't necessarily Intune's fault. That was more Windows and its APIs in effect, so that it could, that Intune is able to manage in that operating system. So it's Intune does what it can, where providing the OS is allowing it through the what's it called, the OMI URIs. That was it. They're the APIs in effect that you can call upon.
Okay, so this more modern management approach, how does it help organizations?
Well, I mean, the first one is that the device don't have to be connected to your domain, or don't have to be connected to your VPN or the network to get that policy. So any patching, any rapid updates, things like that, you can push it out from anywhere, and it will the devices will check in every I can't remember what the refresh rate is, but you can check them in, or you can force a check in from the portal. So that's one of the main things, is that you can do it from anywhere. The other thing, some of the other things are that you can push this config, push these applications down and things like that from anywhere. But one key part is, if like a device needs a rebuild, then you can rebuild it from anywhere. Because if you're using autopilot, Windows Autopilot, then that means you can, in effect, it will rebuild anywhere and then join into Intune and then start against policy. It can even, in some scenarios, join the domain for you anywhere, because it will hook up to a VPN and then do it for you. So that's a great support feature. If a device is not completely bricked, that you can't get into Windows, but there's problems with it, then you can do a remote wipe, rebuild, and it comes back up, and then comes up saying, hey, this is a Sam Foot device, and it needs needs your credentials. Sign in. Right, I'm going to go and download all the software. Downloads it all, and then the user can then start working. Without having to bring that device back to the office to be swapped out, or back to the office to be wiped and rebuilt there and then. So you're saving loads of time, loads of travel costs, things like that. The other thing that it potentially does is that you can then potentially start moving, if you don't necessarily need devices to authenticate with AD directly. Maybe you don't have any software or applications there now. Maybe it's all in Office 365 or sorry, not Office 365, Microsoft 365. Or it's in SaaS applications. You could start to look to Microsoft Entra ID join your devices, or Azure AD join as it was previously, where in effect they're only Azure Microsoft Entra ID joined, not joined to the Active Directory domain, where they can then authenticate there, and start moving away to having Active Directory manage everything. So your users and your devices are then in the cloud, in effect. Maybe still synchronizing with Active Directory whilst you have it, but that pushes you further away to reliance on any actual networking in an office and things like that. So yeah, it's definitely that, and as well, you don't have to. It's another portal. It's only for device management. You're not, some of those users potentially, if RBAC isn't done correctly on AD, they might have more privileges than they need to Active Directory. So reducing that risk of identities, being compromised, things like that. So yeah, I think there's quite a lot there, and we're seeing a lot of organizations moving to it because of that flexibility of being able to manage them anywhere. And we've seen a lot in the pandemic, people jumping to this as quick as they kind of possibly could, at least.
Okay, yeah, no, that seems to make a lot of sense, and as we've mentioned previously, that drive to new working practices is really shaping you know modern organizations, right, in their processes. So, what's sort of the process for an organization? Actually, but before I ask this question, actually, I've got another question. Actually, um, is there a size or scale limit for an organization with Intune? Is from your opinion, if if an organization was willing to, could they just any organization move to Intune, even the largest ones?
Yeah, definitely. It's it's a per user license, but it's scalable for sure. It's it might be that there are some security baselines in there. There are some like default configurations that you can do. That can be done to a small organization of maybe 1 to 3 users. I mean, it may not make complete sense to that, but if if there's someone there that doesn't really wants to make sure they're secure, they've got a central place to do that configuration without having to do it manually. But then if you've got an organization of hundreds of thousands of devices, then it's perfect for that, because you set some of this configuration is set once, and then it's configured and it goes out to all those devices. And it's if you imagine, I guess if you imagine that you had to patch a piece of software because of vulnerability, and it's deployed. I mean, in an organization where there's hundreds of thousands of devices, you'll have a patching capability. There'll be some other tooling in there. But if you were just using group policy to push it, you've got to wait for them to check in and actually do it. And sometimes devices are not connected to the domain because they're just working on Office, Microsoft 365, and maybe not need to authenticate. They check in, potentially once an hour, I think it is, on group policy. I think you might be able to change that, but that's generally what it is. If the device is turned off for that hour, then it's not going to get it. There's no time, and like I said, you don't see that where you are, how whether your policies are deployed or whether applications deployed out. You don't know what your state is. So, again, yeah, doesn't matter about size at all. The bigger it is, I suppose the simpler the issue becomes potentially, less overhead.
And is it then fair to say, for the other end of the spectrum, the smallest organizations, Intune provides them a level of out of the box baseline capability. Because what I'm thinking there is that, like a smaller organization wouldn't have that, more traditional workflow that we've talked about. We're talking about enterprises here, right? Like larger, at least medium-sized businesses, I would say, right? That have this level of management of their devices, right? So, smaller organizations, I assume there is like a baseline that you can apply in Intune, like a sort of the out of the box configuration. So actually, for the smaller end of the scale, in theory, they're getting much more capability, but allowing Intune to take all of that complexity away from them, so that they can just sort of get on and deploy a baseline if they don't have anything, in their organization today.
Yeah, and to be fair, Intune is quite a beast now. There's quite a lot of different areas to it, and it might be that you get them enrolled into Intune, so that you've got somewhere to remotely manage them. That could just be remotely rebooting those devices. You can do that, but it might be that you start off with a way to deploy software. Maybe you have a piece of software that's licensed, and you want to deploy it to all of your devices. And you don't want to go around your 5 or 10 devices and disrupt somebody and manually install it, or maybe they're working remotely in a small organization, and you don't want to give them the key because that's potentially that could then be leaked potentially or taken with them, kind of thing. It allows you to do that central management of deploying software. I mean, that might just be a bonus in itself. And then maybe you got things like you got a small office maybe, and there's you got a Wi-Fi set up. You just deploy the Wi-Fi profile just to make it easier, so you don't have to give it out. There's just some small things that you can do to help an organization in its device management that might just save them quite a lot of time just managing. And then it just builds up. You build that capability up as you need it. I've known some organizations, they've just hooked it up, just Intune up, and they've got they're managing their Chrome configuration at the moment because everything else is done via group policy. But they're starting to think about what they can move over. Maybe you're literally just using it for Windows updates patching, because there's a whole Windows Update for Business. That can manage all your rings and everything. Maybe that's the first thing you move, because that's just it's patching. It's not device management or anything like that.
So what you're saying is it's not an all-encompassing solution. You can slowly migrate across, sort of dip your toes in the water, get comfortable with the user experience, because like you say, Intune is a thing, right? It's not, there's a lot of capability there, so there is going to be an element of upskilling and knowledge shift in the organization. So that's really powerful that they've also thought about that level of flexibility for organizations.
Yeah, definitely. And there's just so much in there. Like I say, even if we did an episode on Intune itself, because we are talking about Windows management part here, we'd be able to skim over it, but again, we wouldn't really scratch the surface with some of it. I think some of our previous episodes, we skimmed across some sections because they're big enough on their own. I think like season 4 episode 8, zero touch deployments. I think we talked about it, and we talked about autopilot, things like that, but we didn't dive into sort of how to do some of that, because there's just so much there that you can do.
Yeah. So could you talk us through that sort of process of moving, from a more traditional, setup to Intune?
Yeah, so kind of the first thing that we need to do is get the devices into Intune, and if Intune's enabled in effect, with your licensing, and there's no policies or anything in there from the start. It's nothing configured, nothing being deployed. So the first part is to get some devices in there, if not get all of your devices starting to go into Intune, just so that you've got that first connection there, because then you can start using it. And that's from a an Azure AD join device or a Microsoft Enter ID join device. That kind of automatically does it for you if you've got the settings configured when they get joined to Azure, Microsoft Enter ID. But from your hybrid join devices or your Active Directory devices, if you want to do it automatically, you have to set up the hybrid join to Enter ID, which is really simple, and the user experience, the user never doesn't really notice any differences with it. It's not user impacting. If anything, it makes it better for them because they get single sign in into any Microsoft Enter ID applications because it knows who they are. But once that's in, you then just apply some group policy in effect to automatically enroll them into Intune. And then the devices enroll. The user doesn't see anything again. It's all done in the background. And then they're enrolled. And that's probably your first step. They're in there now. So now what do I do? So the other parts are, if you're going to do some device configuration, so device restrictions, that kind of thing, there's probably a group policy you need to deploy beforehand if you want Intune to then become sort of like the owner of some of those policy changes. So that policy allows you to set Intune as the priority in effect. Intune wins if there's a conflict with local group policy. So you can start saying, right, Intune is now going to be my source of truth for my config, and now I'm going to start doing it. So even if you've got policy in place already, you can start creating or recreating that policy in effect in Intune, and then it will start taking over those policies in effect. Maybe you've got a slightly different configuration that you want to change. Now Intune now is the source of truth, so it now starts taking over what might be starting to become legacy configuration in group policy. So that's the sort of the way you start. And within Intune, there is a group policy analyzer. So you can actually export your group policy and upload it, and it'll tell you, one, whether it's even valid now, because obviously there's potentially quite a lot of legacy configuration for previous version of Windows. That's not necessarily always the case, because it might be when a new operating system comes out, an organization has a new OU for it and a new policy for it, so it's only targeting those new operating systems. But maybe there isn't. Maybe there's just some legacy policies that people just keep adding to. So it will tell you what Intune's capable of, and whether it sits within any of the policies. And then I think you can either build from there, or you can in effect find out what the config is and then build it yourself. So yeah, that's probably where you'd start off with. And like I said, you start bringing workloads over. Maybe like I said, doing Windows updates, because that's quite a key part about creating your rings. Who gets them first? Is it IT? Is it then your super users? Is it then your the rest of your users? Do you use the Windows Auto Patch, where it does that checking for you based on the hardware, based on the type of user activity, things like that. So there's definitely a few things, and it like I said, it might even be that you want to deploy your software that way to start off with, because you haven't got a mechanism for doing that. Maybe you do it manually.
Yeah, no, that's that sounds really good, and it sounds relatively, if you're in that space, I assume are the skills cross or transferable, because you're effectively managing the same thing. I suppose you've just got a level removed of what you really need to manage, right? It's just taking some of that responsibility away from you.
Yeah, it is somewhat similar to managing group policy and things like that. There is obviously a UI change and everything that it is different on how you do it, but generally, if you've been if you've been using another MDM generally, then you'll kind of understand that concept of mobile device management. But on the other hand, it's just a new interface to deploy policy. So if you've been managing devices like that and applying policies, you know what to choose, kind of thing. In effect, you're going to have a list of stuff to select and what you need to set it to. So it is very similar to what you do before, and some of it is easier to do because Microsoft have made it like that. Deploying Wi-Fi settings is typing in those details and deploying it.
So you're saying like actually getting your first baseline config is actually the in theory the more challenging part of knowing what the settings are and what you should set them to.
Yeah, that's probably the knowledge, that part. Yeah, actually doing the changes or actually inputting it into Intune is quite straightforward, and it is quite easy to understand what it's trying to do. But yeah, like you said, it's understanding what you want to configure and what you can configure as well. It's that knowledge that is key. And like you said, if you're doing that already, or if you're doing that already with group policy or another MDM, then it's that sort of second nature. It's the same thing, just on a different tool, kind of thing.
Okay, and that leads me to my last question, and arguably, well, the one we always ask in these episodes is, how is it licensed?
So you can buy it on its own. You can buy device licenses as well if you have kiosks or device kiosks really is the main thing, where you don't have an actual user. But you've also got user licensing, so that is can be found in Business Premium for the smaller organizations, to say not the lower tier, the smaller organizations. You can buy it on its own, like I just said, or it's in EMS E3 or Microsoft 365 E3, so it's at that E3 tier there. So it's a lot of organizations probably already have it if they didn't know they did. And there is some add-ons for Intune, because I think we talked about that in the Intune suite in season 3 episode 12. Some extra enhancements on top of it, which there is quite a lot of great capability there, but a lot of it is in the the Intune Plan 1. I think that's what it's called now. But the one that's in E3, that's like 80-90% of the capability. So, and that's just been growing since it came out.
Yeah, so what you're saying there is that Intune itself, is a large chunk, or if not the majority of the functionality. Those add-ons are legitimately add-ons, from the base, offering. It just they require Intune to operate correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, you potentially wouldn't want to jump to those until there's some of them you might do, like the remote support one, the remote help might be useful to go with straight away. But some of the other capability you might want to wait until you've got your everything else managed, kind of thing, and then jump to that when you need to.
That sounds great. Anything else that you want to cover, Alan? Anything you think we missed?
There's a lot of device configurations in there. I mean, we talked about device restrictions, things like that. You can do Wi-Fi, you can do certificate deployment, VPN configurations, and there are some custom ones out there as well where the Intune's not fully support. It might be preview features in Windows that you can then enable still as well. The other parts to it is as well, you can manage the AV, BitLocker, you can do laps as well, configuration now, and there's loads of other sort of bits in there. So it's definitely a tool worth looking at and starting to sort of on board in an organization.
Cool. Thanks, Alan. I know you've mentioned a few, but previous episode call out for anybody interested in Intune?
Yeah, so we can run through them again. I did say about 2 of them. So we got season 4, episode 8, which was zero touch deployment. So that was around all the operating systems in there. We've got season 3, episode 12, which was the Intune suite, and the features, the sort of first looks of what's coming, or what's in there at least. And then you've got season 4, episode 2, where I talk about securing bring your own, so mobile application management, another whole section that Intune has, helping you manage your bring your own devices. So there is definitely lots there, and like I said, there's definitely probably 2 or 3 more episodes in there that we could definitely do about it.
Great. No, that's really good.
Yeah. So Sam, what's next week's episode?
Next week's episode is I'll be covering Cosmos DB. So if you have a requirement to store, I'm just going to say large amounts of data in a robust and durable way, then Cosmos DB is definitely a technology that you want to look at. There's, I'm going to say, many different facets to Cosmos DB. It's almost multiple products in one. But I'll take us through, and hopefully I can do it justice, because it's every time I use it, it gets more and more feature rich. Every time I go back, Cosmos is definitely high on the product investment at Microsoft. That's for sure.
Great, that sounds interesting, because I think I've only had a small exposure to it recently. So, and I'm even that sort of part of it. I'm excited, enjoying seeing what its capability is. So yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think it can be quite. I think it can be quite intimidating, right? Until you actually like use it, and it kind of takes away. It is so capable, but yeah, once you do start to use it, it really sort of clicks, and then it takes a lot of the complexity away from what it's doing.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so did you enjoy this episode? If so, please do consider leaving us a review on Apple or Spotify. This really helps us reach more people like you. If you have any specific feedback or suggestions on episodes, we have a link in our show notes to get in contact with us.
Yeah, and if you've made it this far, thanks very much, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Yeah, thanks all.